Welcome to You and Your Democracy. It's a short take civics lesson as part of our program, Where Do We Go From Here? I'm Chuck Parkinson. Each episode, we will look at the head and heart of democracy. We will explore the values and the principles that have created our American exceptionalism and examine the structures and institutions that give us the guardrails of our democratic republic. To quote Benjamin Franklin when asked in 1787 after the Constitutional Convention, Doctor, what have we got? A republic or monarchy? To which Franklin responded with a rejoinder at once witty and ominous, a republic if you can keep it. So now let's take a look at what is this great American experiment, and then ask, what do we need to do to keep it? In today's episode, we will discuss what is compromise, forbearance, and tolerance, and why do they matter. I am pleased to be joined by Dr. John Van Benthuysen, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Black Hills State University. Thanks for joining us today, John.
It's good to be with you again, Chuck.
Why do compromise, forbearance, and tolerance matter?
Well, I'd like to begin by quoting a political theorist by the name of Joseph Schumpeter, who once described democracy as a system where people exchange bullets for ballots in making decisions. Now, what does he mean by that? In any democratic election, there are winners and there are losers, and this creates the potential for conflict because the losers need to believe that their essential rights are going to be respected and that they have a chance in a future election to win elected office. And without that, you have the real possibility of people defecting from the democratic system. And so this is exactly why and where compromise, forbearance, and tolerance come in to kind of safeguard the democratic system from falling apart. So compromise, as most people are probably familiar with, involves concessions, wheeling and dealing to kind of achieve a broader goal. A compromise has been struck when both parties are pretty disappointed, right? And in democratic politics, that's usually a good sign. When you have a Democrat and a Republican very upset as the result of passing legislation, that means good work was probably done, that there was a give and take. Likewise, when we talk about forbearance, this really applies to the winners of elections, and it refers to acting with self restraint once you are in power. Because elected office, you have access to awesome power that you can potentially use against losers. And so, in order to kind of keep the system going, you need to act with forbearance, with restraint, to resist the temptation to punish your political opponents. Finally, there's tolerance. And tolerance is simply accepting behavior or opinions that you don't agree with. You don't have to love it, but you have to accept it. And all of these things kind of combine to kind of keep democracy on the rails. It keeps losers mollified with their loss, and it also makes sure that the winners don't abuse, the power that they have in elected office. Unfortunately, all of these key ingredients to maintaining a democratic system are under severe strain in the United States, frankly. We have less and less compromise between the two parties. Tolerance seems to be deteriorating, and forbearance in office seems to be weakening as well. And so, for political scientists, this is basically a canary in the coal mine for the health of a democratic society when you see these types of deteriorations.
That's very true. When you look at voting patterns in Congress today, and it's similar, I think, in state legislatures around the country, you see almost total party line votes, and it doesn't seem to be any effort for the majority to reach out to the minority, and likewise for the minority to reach out to the majority when there is a bill or an amendment to a bill to try to get compromise right at that point. And it appears to be that we're continuing just to kind of shove things through, and then we wring our hands when people don't, we can't get to the table to talk to each other.
And that's a fairly recent development. Not too long ago, Republicans and Democrats were able to regularly compromise, especially in Congress. It was really only in the late 1990s that political scientists started to notice something changing in regards to the ability of people in Congress to compromise and a deficit in tolerance and forbearance. And it has only gotten worse, unfortunately, since then.
Yeah, because prior to that time, and I actually happened to be working in the Congress when those things started to change. And I saw the changes from when I originally started working in the mid 1970s into into the work there for into the early 2000s. We did see that change begin, but earlier up to that time, we did see compromise. People would sit down, they would work out those agreements, and they were, like you said, if people walked away, nobody was happy. We usually had a decent piece of legislation. Um, and what do you think are the factors that have kind of led us to this point where we don't have that tolerance anymore? We aren't willing to do that compromise.
That's a very good question and could be the topic of several dissertations. I will say, just very briefly, when we're talking about kind of external factors, we had a lot of compromise in Congress during the Cold War. And a lot of historians and political scientists think that there was a unifying effect of having kind of a common adversary on the international scene, the Soviet Union, that kind of dampened, partisan passions in the interest of national unity. That's one potential factor. I would say another potential factor domestically has to do with our media environment. For some of our younger viewers, they may not remember a time when the news was pretty limited. You had the three major networks on TV. You had public broadcasting, and that was about it. And they presented a fairly uniform narrative to Americans. It didn't really matter if you're watching the news on NBC, ABC, CBS. I mean, you got essentially the same story. Today, in the third decade of the 21st century, we have a highly fragmented media environment where Americans are able to, pick and choose, the news that they want to be exposed to in a much more intimate way. And this has created silos or bubbles in which Americans are able to kind of only seek out news that kind of confirms what they believe. And so what we used to have kind of a common media environment that we could all draw from, and that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that is exacerbating, or at least playing a part in exacerbating the differences that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Remember Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, when he was the anchor of CBS News forever how long, and people believed what that was could say. But as you indicated, that we had a common sense. There was not the siloing we are seeing in the news that was presented. And this is the one for a whole another topic discussion. Also, is how the press has moved and has the impact that it's placed on attitudes of the people, and is it just one that is helping to basically reinforce what the people are believing, or their thoughts, as you touched on, where their thoughts now, there's somebody that said what I believe, so I can continue to follow
I think that's right. And I think another point that I would like to add is that increasingly, at least in political science, we are of the opinion that this is an elite-led process in terms of a more fragmented society that is kind of having an effect on lowering tolerance and compromise. That elites are really, whether in the media or in politics, recognize that through the medium of television that it's more appealing and easier to kind of get out your base if you're kind of rigidly adhering to principles. That is effective in getting out your base, whereas kind of engaging in compromise, being tolerant, increasingly seems to be associated with weakness, and that's a problem in terms of maintaining a healthy democratic society.
I think we see that as we've gotten more polarized from both of our parties, where an individual member of Congress is more likely to be challenged. They're certainly not going to be challenged from someone in the middle that's closer to the center than they are. If they're going to be challenged from somebody, and we just saw that in some primary elections yesterday, where people who have been further on one side than the other won those elections because that person either had been there too long, quote, too long, or were willing to compromise with the other side.
Yeah, so I think you know, the responsibility is on citizens, really, when it comes to kind of valuing, these key democratic values of tolerance, compromise, and forbearance. This is one area where I hope we have a bottom-up movement where, citizens, recognize and reward, our representatives who are willing to engage in compromise, who demonstrate tolerance for the loyal opposition as opposed to an enemy. These are the types of values and traits of representatives that I hope Americans will value more in the future.
That's a very good point. And compromise is hard work.
It's not easy.
Well, hopefully, and that could be a discussion, I think, for another day. As we wind down, that was a very good thought, but any others you want to leave us?
Well, we have an election coming up in 2020, and I just hope that Americans have these values in mind when they are making, their decision. Which candidate is expressing some tolerance, willing to compromise? Which candidate is more likely or not to, engage in forbearance in elected office? That could start the process of getting us back on track.
John, that's a good point to end on, getting us back on track. I really appreciate it. That's our episode for now. I want to thank Dr. John Van Benthuysen for sharing his expertise and thoughts with us today. And as always, our executive producer, Suzanne Stratford, and the SDPP technical staff for their creativity and hard work on this program. Thank you also to supporters of South Dakota Public Broadcasting who make this program possible. To view previous episodes in this series, go to sdbp.org/election. If you have comments or suggestions for future episodes, send us a note at programming@sdbp.org. Until our next short take, I'm Chuck Parkinson.